I would like to call our board meeting to order this morning on Tuesday, April the 30th for the first reading of our 2020 general fund budget. Thank everybody for being here, and we certainly hope that this will be an informative conversation. At this time, I'll turn it over to Dr. Royster for the presentation this morning. Dr. Royster.
Thank you, Mr. Sellers. Good morning. It's our pleasure to present to you for first reading the budget. Just kind of at the outset, with just a couple of very minor exceptions on the expense side, and with some very positive exceptions on the revenue side, what you're going to see today reflects almost in its entirety what you saw in the budget workshop. We think this is, I believe, one of the best budgets we've been able to present as far as addressing so many of the goals that are in your strategic plan. Those goals originated in our community, came through a process that community members, students, faculty, district staff, and trustees were involved in. So you'll see a number of things reflected in this budget that attempt to carry out the items that were placed into the strategic plan. You also will see, as you have seen in every budget that this administration has presented, including those that we had to present in years that we had very dismal financial picture, budgets that represent the importance of personnel throughout the system. Everything that we do and the quality in which we do those things is directly related to the quality of personnel that we have. So to kind of set the stage, as we did in the budget workshop, we want to look at a little bit about where we are, particularly in goals 1 and 2, because they directly relate, goal number 1, to our primary mission and responsibility, and that's to create college and career-ready graduates that will be able to lead good and productive lives and be assets to our community. Goal 1, student success. And I won't read all of it to you, but I will point out to you one thing that we added, because I think it's a good reflection of the growth that we've had. We started a few years ago looking at the rank of Greenville County schools as compared to the rank of all other school districts in the state in measures of academic attainment. So the simplistic view of this is every academic measure that's used throughout the state of South Carolina, the districts were ranked number 1 through number 84. And this is the average of all those rankings. Just like in a golf match, the lowest score is the winner. So if you rank number 1 across every ranking, 8th grade science, ACT, graduation rate, you'd be number 1. In 2012, we were number 19. This past year, we reached 14th overall. And that requires tremendous movement, as you can imagine, across a lot of measures of academic achievement to be able to move 5 places in that amount of time. At the same time, other districts are also moving and advancing. And you see some of the highlights of those academic improvements and attainments. There's a continued list of those things. And again, as you move close to the end of that list, 86% of our students meet or exceed criteria to ensure students meet the profile of the South Carolina graduate. Graduation rate improvement, tremendous increase in industry certifications, and some of the areas where we've had some of the more significant increases in in measures of student academic success. Premier workforce. Again, as I said, none of the attainments that we've had, none of the success that we've enjoyed, none of the improvements that have occurred would have occurred without having quality personnel. Now, you all already know that the single greatest factor to improve student achievement is a quality teacher in the classroom. Second to that is a quality principal in the school, but it requires people throughout the organization performing quality level of work in every job, in every department, at every level to ensure that those individuals have the support and the leadership that they need to have. One of the things that, as we look back on past budgets, that we are most pleased to be able to talk about has been this board's effort in focusing on improved teacher pay. We were number 35 in the state in 2010, and now we're in the top 5 across all average measures of teacher salary in the state of South Carolina. And you'll see there the number of nationally board certified teachers we have. You will see the turnover rate of teachers in our district compared to the state. You see the number of our teachers or the percentage that have master's degrees or higher, and the average years of experience. So we have a highly educated and well-experienced teacher workforce. And you'll see our reference to one of our programs that has been very successful in getting teachers into the profession, moving individuals from other sectors of the job market that have the content knowledge into teaching, the GATE program. So let's talk a little bit about where we spend our money. As you all know, we are not only dependent upon our personnel for the quality of work that is done and the quality of success that our students attain, but it's also where we spend the largest amount of money. There's a reason the person's so big and the building is so small. As you can see to the left, in FY19, total salaries and benefit out of our district budget is over $564 million. Everything else to run the district, the supplies, the equipment, the insurance, the utilities, all those other things account for right at $56 million. Now, when you look at the people, again, the person's far bigger than the building. The biggest person, when you look at the people in categories from left to right, teachers and aides, that's 64.4% of our budget, which accounts for $363.4 million. Instructional support, people that are supporting that instruction, instructing students directly that aren't teachers or aides, $60.5 million. Operations at the school level, that would be individuals, primarily our custodial workforce. They report to a school, they're in a school all day, they deliver their services directly to an individual school. That's $53.7 million. School administration, principals, assistant principals, AAs, $32.9 million, that's 5.9%, and school clerical, 2.7%. 93.2% of our personnel that account for the tremendous percentage of our budget that goes to personnel are school-based people. The last two columns, in the last two that are bracketed together, the one to the left represents district employees. The one to the right represents district employees that are directors or above. That's the leadership of the district. In the general fund budget, that's 1.3%. The column to the left, that's everybody at the district level, including plumbers, carpenters, groundskeepers, payroll clerks, clerical support throughout the organization, the people in HR that process applications, that handle substitute location. It's everybody at the district level. And it also includes, because they don't go to a particular school every day, it also includes transportation. It includes bus drivers, aides, and transportation supervisors. So you can see where we spend our money. Now, if you go look at Insight, which is really the only statewide comparison of school districts, the percentages will look a little bit different. In fact, we'll show even fewer percentage of people at the district level in administration because Insight includes all funds, including the capital budget. This is just the general fund. I want to make sure that everybody saw that note at the bottom. But the general fund is what we're here discussing today, and it's the budget recommendation that you have in front of you. Now, the all other, that's what constitutes all other. Technical and data processing, fixed costs, insurance, utilities, instructional support, instruction, materials, equipment for instruction, the materials and equipment used in the maintenance department and transportation. So you can see that little sliver of 9% to the right of the total budget, how it's broken out to the left. And there's really nothing in your budget recommendation that you have from us that changes any of this appreciably. It obviously still is heavily weighted towards personnel. That's simply a narrative explaining those categories. That's a chart that captures 10 years of increase to the general fund budget, which totals right at $191 million. If you look from left to right, mandates is the largest bar at a little over $99 million. So that would be items that are either mandated by the federal or state government and either not funded or partially funded. In most years, in almost every year, the teacher salary increase would be in there because it is a partially funded mandate. That is not true this year. There's an exception this year. Second bar, growth in new schools. It's great that we continue to be a growing community and a growing district, but that requires personnel to address the change in population each year. The third bar, representing a little over $55 million in salary increases. Those would be increases that the board has approved for employees other than teachers, because there is no raise mandated by the state for any group of employees except for teachers. And it would also include, if you recall, I mentioned to you at the outset that we had moved from 35th in teacher salary to 5th. So that meant in a number of years for a number of categories in our teacher salary schedule, the administration recommended and the board approved doing beyond what was required by the state. That's captured in that line. The very small green bar that is third from the end represents special revenue transfers. It's been, I think, 2 years since we had to deal with that. But you may recall the state took some funds that they used to send through EIA, where a dollar is a dollar, and they moved them over to EFA, where a dollar is dependent on the formula's local ability to pay. So depending on the year, we might have gotten anywhere from 70 to 73 cents of that dollar. So that $6.7 million there represents replacing the lost approximately 30 cents, because most of those funds were used to employ personnel. The last two lines represent everything else that we spend money on, and in that 10-year period, we've reduced that by a little over $1.2 million. So that's a little bit of history. The highlights of this year's budget. No teacher in Greenville County will be paid less than $40,000 per year. Second, no teacher in Greenville County will receive less than a 5% raise, which requires adding a 5% step at the end for the 7% of our teachers who are off our salary schedule. As you all will recall, we have a 30-step schedule and the state has a 22-step schedule. But 7% of our teachers are off our schedule, and without this additional, they would receive only 4%. Teachers with 3 to 30 years of experience will receive varying increases based on their steps, because as you recall, the steps are not equal distance. They range from 1% to almost 4%. So the teachers with 3 to 30 years experience, because of the varying sizes of those steps, would receive from 5 to 9%. Now, in order to ensure that no teacher receive less than $40,000, the cells at 0, 1, and 2 require a double-digit percentage increase to those cells to ensure a starting wage of $40,000. And we certainly believe that coming out of college, that is a much more competitive wage for us to be able to offer to first-year teachers, putting us in what I believe will be one of the most competitive salary ranges in the state. We're in the top 5. Now, we also know there are other districts that are working towards that same goal of getting starting pay at no less than $40,000. So we want to continue to advance there. This also recognizes the value of all our employees to meeting the goals of the district by providing a minimum 4% increase or the step to which they are entitled if it is greater than 4%. Many of our non-teaching employees and non-certified employees are on salary schedules that have steps to them. None of them even have as many as the state teacher salary schedule. We've not every year been able to give a step increase to those people. They have every year received an increase, a cost of living increase. But one thing that happens over time is that some of our less experienced, people that started less experienced, don't receive the raises to keep them competitive with the marketplace if we don't give step increases. Because their steps vary in height like the teacher schedule, except they're more predictable than the teacher schedule. The big steps are at the front end, and the smaller steps are with our more experienced people. This also provides something that we've not been able to do throughout the district at elementary schools. Every middle school and every high school teacher has at least a planning period based on the schedules that principals choose to implement in their individual schools. Most of them have 2 periods, generally a team period and an individual planning period or a grade level or a departmental. But at the secondary level, our teachers there have a planning period, and quite honestly, most of them 2. The elementary level, the only way that the district provides for principals to allow a planning time for their teachers is through the assignment of related arts teachers. And that formula is based on the size of your school, but what it does is across the district, it provides enough related arts teachers so that every teacher would have a planning period 3 days a week. Now, some principals have been very innovative, and they've figured out how to get 4 or 5 using things other than their related arts. But what this does is it takes the utilization of classified employees. As you may recall, one example was several years ago we had science labs, so they might choose to use a science lab assistant, or maybe an aide in PE to be able to have more students in PE. They may have some sort of computer lab that they do particular work with. In other words, an instructionally focused purpose operated by a classified employee, but designed by certified people and approved by our academics division. So they're not losing instructional time, but by adding enough aides to ensure that every elementary school of every size throughout the district has enough personnel assigned by the district to make every day, every week, the opportunity for a planning period for all their regular classroom teachers. The next, all right, good. We'll get that same kind of applause at the end, we'll be in good shape. Well, you can't buy anything new without spending a little bit of money. All right. This also allows for, these next 2 are direct. That is a strategic plan item, planning period, not specifically spelled out the way we're presenting to you to carry it out. As it was, no specificity was given to it, but that was a strategic planning item. The next 2 are as well. As you know, we do our allocations at the elementary level differently than the middle and the high school. Middle and high school, whatever the allocation ratio is, you take the number of students you got, you divide it by that number, that's how many teachers you got. Elementary, we do it by grade level to try to ensure that grade level classes are within reasonable size ranges. So it's an allocation ratio formula. It's not like a cap. Now, the result, the way we do it is average across the district, our classes are smaller than the allocation ratio. But as you know, with any average, that means there's some people that are above that allocation ratio. For the last probably 8 or 9 years, we have used +3 as the point where we add a teacher. So every class in that grade gets 3 over the ratio, we add a teacher. We put into, and you all approved in our strategic plan, moving from 3 over to 2 over. When we presented this to you in the workshop, we were concerned that we might only be able to do that, even with a tax increase, at 2 grade levels. But because of the increase in state revenue, we will be able to, in our recommended balanced budget, do that for every elementary grade level where we use that allocation formula. All right. The next item is a strategic planning item as well. And that was the effort over time to take first grade from 19 to 1 to 15 to 1. That is the number. When we talk about class size ratio at other grade levels and class size ratio, generally we're talking about a positive working condition for teachers and a better environment for students, but the actual research around student achievement, when you tie it back to achievement, is 15 to 1 or less. And first grade, we believe, is the most key grade that we have. Particularly with all the focus that you've seen at the state level on Read to Succeed. And, that's been at grades 1, 2, and 3. And unfortunately, a lot of it's been focused on grade 3. The key to the improvement is focus at grade 1. So this drops our class size down to a more manageable level related to improved student achievement. Over time, when we get to 15 to 1, it will then allow us to shift those remediation, those support resources from grade 1 to shift them into grade 2 to help address the students that don't master it in grade 1. So it allows us to refocus those reading interventionists that you all will recall that we focus them now in grade 1. So it would allow to refocus that by bringing that size down to 15 to 1 for that all-important first grade year. It also is a continuation. The last major item is a continuation of the ongoing reduction of the ratio for middle and high school counselors. We were at 300 to 1. You all approved going to 275 last year. We looked at trying to go to 250 all at once. It was not just a cost factor, though it was, a fairly costly item. Our real concern was not being able to find that many qualified counselors to implement a drop from 300 to 250. And I think based on the staffing that we had for this year, that was a wise decision on the board's part and a good recommendation on our part. We got good people in those positions, but we would have struggled had we had more to have to fill. So this is the second phase to that. Now, this sort of catches up the rest of it. That first bullet, that's a huge cost item. State-mandated employer retirement and health care increases. Second one, as you saw historically over time in the last 10 years, the third largest expenditure we have is growth for student population. The next bullet you'll see that involves adding the 7th grade at Rudolph Gordon and really the full year's principal salary at Fountain Inn High School. There were a number of smaller items in the general fund budget about exam fees, materials, software for students, items for teacher recruitment, induction year training and retention, funding for teacher certificate upgrades. As you all recall, when a teacher gets a master's degree or a master's plus 30 or a doctorate, then we're compelled and do pay them more. That has about $1 million line item cost every year. District and school leadership development, again, very directly tied to the strategic plan. And I think we also included some information in there in the narrative or the answer to one of your questions. There is now a lot of good research that supports, and particularly supports the models that we're using for school leadership development and supports the direct connection between those leadership development activities and improved student achievement. Then you'll see the personnel, outside personnel for growth, special ed teacher, psychologist, and district support. That's a burglar and fire alarm technician. What we removed, those items in the House bill, the cost to remediate does not meet expectations. because as far as we can tell by the direction of all the legislation in Columbia, that's not going to happen this year if it happens. Not going to happen this year. And the 30-minute unencumbered teacher librarian planning time, we approached it in a different way. You'll see that as an ad down there at the bottom, by using instructional support employees as opposed to teachers. And then you'll see we added some base material allocation for the career centers for $25,000 per career center to help offset some of the materials costs that they use, which they have some fairly high materials cost in the more technical courses that they do at the career centers. And I think this, a friend of mine shared this with me earlier today, and it was really in reference to something else that we were addressing. He's a CEO of a company, but he had a career in the Army before he did that, and he said, what you all are doing, referencing a particular thing, he said it put me in mind of this saying that we had in the Army. And when I read that, when he sent it to me, I thought, I think that pretty well captures this budget too. The mission first and people always. We're focused on our mission, and that's creating college and career-ready students, and we're seeing success with that mission, but we can't do that mission without people. So the mission is first, but people are always a constant in the forefront of the importance of what we do and how we do it, and I think that's borne out in this budget. So now Mr. Knotts is going to share with you the more positive revenue picture we have. And then as you see in there, all these great things that I've shared with you, there is also a local price tag for those things, but it is a price tag that is less than two previous general fund budgets that the board has approved, but it is still a significant investment, but a significant investment in something that is of great significance to our community. Mr. Knotts?
Thank you, Dr. Oyster. There are several items that have been changed. I'm basically summarizing page 3 and 4 in your package. The administration has updated the revenue projections for 4 categories: property taxes, Act 388 millage, miscellaneous local revenue, and EFA and employer fringes. On property taxes, based on a review of the current property tax revenue through March 2019, and a revision of the FY19 projected mill value, the administration has increased the projected FY20 mill value by a total of 2% when compared to the revised FY19 mill value. The projected FY20 property tax revenue is $195.9 million, an increase of $3.6 million when compared to the information presented at the board work session. Since the work session, the South Carolina Revenue and Fiscal Affairs Office have given us their annual letter talking about millage increase. Per their letter, the millage cap for Greenville County Schools for FY20 is 3.9%. Based on this calculation, to provide local funding to meet student growth and inflation, this formula is calling for an increase in the millage of 3.95% or 5.7 mils. State law provides school boards the authority to levy millage not used in the 3 preceding years. Greenville County Schools' existing carryover millage totals 10.1 mils. There are 1.1 mils from FY17 that have not been used and will lapse if not levied for FY20. The administration is proposing an operational millage increase of 6 mils for FY20 in order to meet the needs associated with growth and inflation in the programs Dr. Oyster just reviewed with you. Looking at miscellaneous local revenue. The district invests its funds in the state and local government investment pool until the funds are needed to cover expenditures. Based on the current interest rates, actual to date interest income, and updated projected interest income, the district has conservatively increased the projected FY20 interest income by $454,000 when compared to the work session presentation. Looking at changes in state revenue. The EFA allocation per the House budget was $2,467. The Senate budget increased the EFA base student cost allocation to $4,487. The revised projected total reflecting the Senate EFA allocation is $184.2 million, an increase of $1.4 million from the amount presented at the work session. State employee fringe allocation. State Department of Education has updated their employee fringe allocation, and it now includes funding for the 1% retirement increase for FY20. The revised allocation is $100.5 million, an increase of $1.7 million when compared to the work session information. That is a summary of the revenue changes since the work session. Mrs. Thomas will review the few changes to the expenditure section.
Good morning. The changes to the expenditure section are those that Dr. Royster reviewed. If you look on page 5, they're highlighted in blue. Sorry, can you hear me now? The changes that Dr. Royster reviewed for expenditures are highlighted in blue for you on page 5. And the detailed information for the first item, the Career Center instructional materials, is on page 10. And this is to provide a base allocation of $25,000 for each of the 4 career centers to fund some of the more expensive items that come with the types of classes that are offered at the career centers, including things like personal protective equipment. The other change is the Greenville County School Initiative for the 30-minute teacher planning time. And this is not a state mandate, Greenville County School Initiative, and this is to provide instructional support personnel to supplement our related arts classes centering around areas that directly support classroom instruction, such as STEAM labs, innovation labs, and makerspace labs. Those are the only 2 changes to the expenditures. Dr. Royster?
That covers the changes, both the revenue and expense. That covers the primary focus that I wanted to share with you in summary of the budget. And so we certainly will answer any question that the board might have. Now, questions coming out of this reading before final reading, we have a deadline for those questions.
The end of the day on Sunday, May 5th, please.
So end of the day, Sunday, May the 5th, so we might get answers back to you. If you have any written questions following today, sometimes we neglect to mention that all the way to the end, and want to make sure I reminded you of the deadline for written questions. But certainly any question you have today, we'll be glad to answer that or get the answer for you.
Who has okay. Any questions at this time? Mrs. Levinas-Wells.
So, Dr. Royster, basically, what is the millage increase you're asking for?
This, to balance this budget with the items included in it that we shared with you just then, is a $6 million increase. The millage increase, Mr. Knott, so I don't get the numbers incorrect, the formula says to meet growth and inflation, the increase should be for this year
5.7 mils.
5.7. So it's slightly above that. We also have 1.1 use or lose millage of the 10 you have in reserve. So it is underneath the formula driven, here's what you need to be doing for population and inflation, but it is inside the use or lose in that number. And it's within 3/10 of that number.
And that's going to generate $8,118,000.
Is that correct, Mr. Knott?
Yes.
And that gives every elementary school teacher a 30-minute planning period.
It does.
And what does that increase for high school and middle school?
It does not increase their planning time. They all have either 1 or 2 planning periods a day now.
Is it just 1 or 2, or do some get more than 2?
The only way they'd be getting more than 2 if they have some particular job outside of those 2 that they get, and then the principal would be making a decision to increase a class size to do that.
Okay. because I'm getting a couple of emails on some in middle school have 2 or more, and I'm just
If we pass along any that have more than 2, we'll be able to look into what function they're carrying out.
I'm having.
But it's common for them to have 2 planning periods. And when principals do that, what they're making a decision then to do is looking at the instructional program in their school. And I would assume in conversation with their faculty, if I choose to have more planning periods in my day, school day, then I'm making a choice that class sizes are going to be larger for the classes they teach. So if they only had 1 planning period, their class sizes would go down.
I just find
And
that-
often they'll find that time is as important for preparing for the class as having fewer students would be to them.
Right, and I understand that, but I have a concern that some would have more than 2, where others, it might cause a little friction there, if you understand where I'm coming from. And then the public probably would not look on this in a positive way. So.
Well, they should only have, no school should have more than 2 planning periods. Again, if they're doing some other job that's benefiting students, they may be doing that during a period as opposed to standing in front of a class.
Okay. That's all that I have right now. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Mrs. Goodwin-Caldwell?
Yes, Dr. Royster, on the 30-minute teacher planning time, is that for, do you have the number of how many RFEs that entails?
How many positions? Yes, ma'am. If you will look back in your expenditure budget on page, find the right page. Thank you, Coach. On page 5, you will see on line 20, it's $2.75 million. Then if you look back on page 11, it will show you the actual number.
I don't know where I'm looking.
Well, I thought it did. Apparently it doesn't have it in there. It's on which page?
Page 5,
Line 20.
line 20, 30 minutes, 70.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see it. It's right there in parentheses.
Page 5 and what?
73.5.
Okay, what they have right now is the, what is it that they have, Jeff, where that they have they go into the science labs and the teacher is teaching on the screen? What is that called?
The virtual science lab?
The virtual science lab. So is this adding to that?
No, we don't have the virtual science lab anymore. So
When
this
did
would be in
that-
addition to. I mean, this would be allow them to do a science lab if they chose to, or a STEAM lab, or whatever they happen to choose to do.
So when did y'all discontinue virtual science
I think that was
lab?
last year, Dr. Worcester.
So last year before, we ran about 3 years of data,
Yes.
and they were not performing any better than the students who didn't go to the lab.
Okay, so these, tell me something about these labs that you have in here.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Tell me something about these that you have, the STEAM lab, innovation labs, and the market-based
Bakersfield.
labs. Is that in every school? Is that going to be in every school, or is that just going to be in certain schools?
So a lot of the schools, those 4 that are listed there, a lot of the schools already have those types of labs in there. If as Dr. Worcester said, if a principal is chosen to add through local funds or for flex a teacher, a lot of times it's a STEAM lab teacher, it's a makerspace teacher, or innovation lab teacher. So these would be the 4 we would propose that we could help support in the schools. Now that sentence at the end of that paragraph, though, does say that a school can suggest some other course they want to put in their school, and that would be approved through the assistant superintendent and myself.
So we already have some schools that already have these things in
Yes.
place. How many schools do we have that don't have any of these things in place that this would probably?
We'd have to get you an exact count through that, because that's a local decision. I would say there's more schools that don't have them currently than do have them.
So that's the decision by the associate superintendent and the
Assistant superintendent
and
who
the
supervises.
principals.
Yes, ma'am.
In other words, the principal would, if it's something different from this, because we already have models of this in schools, something different from this, the principal would propose it to their assistant superintendent. So Dr. Mitchell Hofer, for example, I seriously know, they'd first go to her if it's one of her schools, and then would come to Mr. McCoy's department, and they said, well, yeah, this would be a good instructional support. What we didn't want to do is simply, right now these students are having, it is an instructional time for them, for a lot of our students. So we didn't want to reduce instructional time and just, they're just going to go maybe 30-minute break on the playground or whatever. We wanted to replace instructional time with instructional time, even though it's not taught by a teacher, but it's in instructional activities designed by certified personnel. We have schools now, some of them use their flex position, do things like that. Some of them have volunteers that come in from the outside to offer opportunities. Really, it becomes a related art.
That's what I was just going to ask you.
Yes,
Is that going to be in the schedule as a related
It would be like, in other words, it would be set up and scheduled like related arts, because they have to take this combined with their 3 days a week related arts to give the planning period every day. So the easiest, simplest way to do this is this becomes the other 2 days at that time. They go to maybe the same thing both days, or maybe they go to 2 different things. But it's to support instruction. One of the challenges when we first looked at this, it wasn't just the cost of adding teachers to do it. It was the challenge of whether we could even find that many certified teachers all at one time, considering we're having challenges to find enough teachers to meet growth now. And in related arts, those are some of the more challenging areas, particularly art and music, to find a sufficient number of certified teachers.
So is this going to be paraprofessionals, or are they going to be certified?
Paraprofessional.
Okay, and it's only going to be 30 minutes?
They'll probably end up being about 45, but it guarantees a 30-minute. Right now, their related art periods are 45 minutes.
Right.
But, there's a little back and forth with that. But what we wanted to make sure is that we met or exceeded the 30 minutes that are in the legislation, if the legislation ever passes. In other words, we already have it in place. We don't have to be concerned about the amount of time. So it would be between 30 and 45 minutes.
Okay. That's all I have right now.
Thank you. Anybody else? Dr. O'Connor?
Dr. Royster, I'm not sure if you remember getting applause for a budget in recent times, but it's kind of exciting.
It happens not all that frequently.
Well, these are the best recommendations I've seen in years in terms of the quality of classroom experience for students and teachers. And I want to say it really reflects, this investment really reflects this board and district's priorities for class size reduction, a focus on early reading success, and giving our teachers what they deserve and need to be successful. And I really appreciate that. And I'm also excited that we finally now will reach the recommended ratio for guidance counselors that we've been moving toward for several years, and I'm glad we're able to get all the way to that number this year. One of the things that I am especially interested in with the moving from +3 when you get over our recommended ratios to +2, which I think is really essential to the work we're trying to do. I'm not sure why students who are special needs students who are pushed in for inclusion are not included in the ratio for calculating these numbers, because it seems to me that we are already really high in our elementary grade levels, especially in high growth schools in areas like mine, where you might already know that you're going to have 26 second graders ready to go when the doors open, but then by October you'll have a few more, and then more throughout the year. And in addition to that, special needs students coming in for certain periods of the day. And it just seems to me that we should include those special needs students in the number when we are considering the ratio, because otherwise it seems we run the risk of having the classes so large that it's not really benefiting the special needs students coming into it or the students who are in the regular classroom having such large numbers. And then when you get up to 4th and 5th grade and the students are larger and the classrooms are, the sizes are staying the same, and then we're asking for hands-on learning, especially in science, for example, and you end up maybe could have 32, 33, 34 students with those special needs numbers coming in. I would just like to ask if the district is looking at ways of including those special needs students into the calculation so that we can be more mindful of early planning. So that the second part of that question relating to early planning is, if you know that this is where you're headed in the fall, you're already at +2 by spring, and you know you're going to have students moving in and the special needs numbers affecting your classrooms, can we allow our teachers to go ahead and hire in those cases so that they are able to choose from the most highly qualified teacher pool rather than having to wait until fall when you can already predict that they're going to be short, and then they're not really able to choose from the most highly qualified teacher pool anymore, which is very significant drawback. And I would think that if they did hire in the spring and something happened, we'd still be able to use those highly qualified teachers in another part of our district, but you can't go back and find them again after they've already been hired. So those are kind of the related to each other questions for class size and planning for that growth when we know it's going to happen in the schools that take more students in over the course of the year routinely than go out.
I'm going to ask Ms. Hogan and Ms. Farley to walk forward, but I think there are a few things that we need to clarify on that. First, special ed students, the only ones that wouldn't be in a teacher's class count are self-contained.
Right.
That's the first thing.
Right.
So that's the minority of our special ed students to begin
Right.
with. Within the self-contained population, a lot of them, when they come in for inclusion, the teacher and or an aide accompanies them into the class. Not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time. So we're talking about a small number within a small number that actually would be in the teacher's class without there being a special ed, either paraprofessional or professional in there with them. So we do take that into consideration, and they're in those numbers with that small exception. And we can probably send you the number that's in that exception. It may be in the answer to one of your questions that you submitted in writing. Now, as far as planning, Ms. Farley can talk a little more in detail about this. We start in February sending out baselines and hiring teachers based on projections for the coming school year. And so we hire without having a place yet for them. I think with this year we hired about 55 teachers February, first part of March. And we'll do that. We'll hire teachers all the way up to really the start of school, but the bulk of the hiring of teachers occurs before the end of the previous school year. And Ms. Farley does take into account past growth. But as you all might imagine, with 76,000 students spread over 84 different schools, to be deadly precise is extremely difficult. And we really struggle to be able to recommend to you some of the things that we recommend you put in the budget because they reflect obviously a millage increase, and then have a lot of extra teachers. Because the way we do it, we really have very few classes when you look at them. And you take out where a principal has decided to move one from one grade to another because there was a more difficult or challenging situation there. We really have very few places, considering the number of elementary classrooms, where we actually have numbers that exceed the two over that we say that we use within our allocation form. They're now two over. So, you know, would it be ideal we went out and hired this big pool of quality teachers and then we just assigned them out right when school started? But that's probably just not a financial reality. It would prevent us from doing a lot of other things that are in this budget. So I'm going to let the two of them speak a little more specifically to what I said.
Okay.
Everything Dr. Royster said, I concur with. The other thing that I would add would be that we rely heavily on these schools themselves to let us know if they need any assistance. There is an administrator at every IEP meeting. They're required to be there and be a part of that. So if a team decides that a student needs to go into general education for science or social studies, they actually have real time that they can know how many in their building need to go in those classrooms. And then they have control of assigning the teacher. So if the principal chooses to assign the 5 self-contained students to one science teacher, they would overload that room possibly. Many of them choose to divide them up. And we see that across the board different ways, but really the reality is they have that information at their fingertips, and we depend on them to let us know if they need assistance in looking at who else in their building might be able to go in. But just what Dr. Royster said about the assistants or the teachers, if the entire self-contained class is going out for science at a certain time, the teacher may even go and help. But that is typically for science and social studies because the special ed teachers are not. The students don't have a disability in those areas, but they also are not content teachers. The special ed teachers don't have a degree in science or social studies, so they're going out and getting exposure to those classes. But if you need those numbers, it is a very small percentage. We could look at that.
Yeah. May I? Thank you. And I do want you all and us to take a look at the specific numbers because where it matters is where the decisions are being made so that the classes are overloaded, because I don't believe that benefits the students coming in or those that are regularly in the classroom, especially if you might have, and I thought it was up to 4 classes, class periods a day, that a teacher could have students coming in to their already full classroom all year long, and it wouldn't be counted in their ratio. So if we can take a look at where that's specifically happening, I think that my understanding is that if you have to have a teacher or aide going in with them, then you want to keep them together because there aren't enough adults to spread them out into different classrooms. Well, that would make a very significant overload to the classrooms they go to. And I just think that if we are aware of where that's happening, we might be able to help the building level people figure out when they need help, even if they don't know to ask for it, because they're just trying to follow all the compliance of what they need to do, but they don't feel they have an alternative if those are the number of students who need to be in there, but it's too late. And there's no formula for adding additional teachers at that point.
And Dr. O'Connor, I do part of principals meeting almost every month. I do a session about special education, so what we can probably do at the next principals meeting is add that to my monthly things that I check in with them, because they're already building their schedule for next year, and those IEP meetings are being held, and so we can ask them to look at those numbers. There's no real way in the IEP system for me to look at science and social studies, but they know their students. The administrators should know where they're placing those students and work collectively with them or collaboratively with them. I think we can put that on their list, I guess, as a check system, so we can work better between the two departments to ensure that. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about the fact that just because they had a disability, sometimes teachers will say, I received 2 students from that class, but one of them may not need any additional help because of the content. You know, if the IEP team writes that they should be able to go in, many of them can go in and perform the activities without any additional assistance. So just because they had that IEP didn't really mean...
I do understand that, and I appreciate it, but if you've already got 29 students and you were supposed to have 24, and then you add a couple more...
Certainly.
It really... So my wish is that we would look at ways to include those students in the ratio, so that when we talk about 2 or more, we're also including those students who might be coming in. Even if it is a small percentage, it's a big number for particular classrooms that we might be able to help in next year's budget, for example, in addressing that, if it turns out to be something that would be meaningful to do across the board.
And Dr. Ball-Connor, if I might add to that as well. Sorry, I have a sinus infection, so I'm struggling with this morning.
That's okay.
If I could add to that too, a lot of times what principals are doing is balancing. Science and social studies is also the biggest subjects we pull out for ESOL and pull out for intervention for math or reading. And so a lot of times principals are being very intentional about that. If they're pushing 2 kids in, a lot of times they're looking at that schedule to look at, and well, 4 kids might be going out as well. To that, because we certainly would share that concern. We don't want to see classrooms of 6 extra, 8 extra kids at one time of any makeup of students in there. So principals are pretty adept at, when they consider that in an IEP meeting, they're looking at that schedule to figure out, okay, well, 2 ESOL kids are already being pulled out that time, or 3 kids. We can push in a special ed kid, self-contained kid into this class.
And the same thing would be true for the students, and this is predominantly at elementary, what Jeff and I are both speaking to. At elementary, in a classroom of 25, you may have 3 students that receive resource services. So if they leave to go to a different special education teacher, maybe the time that someone else pushes in. So that is part of the consideration. We don't necessarily have that data as far as their schedules and what times across the whole district, but certainly we can ask them to consider that, but we can look at numbers for you, certainly.
Yeah, I think if you knew that you're already at +2, the question would be, what can you do about providing that additional relief if you're really at +4 because of the students coming in? So it's, maybe we could address it sooner rather than later, but just if the problem is not as big as it might be. And then, Ms. Farley.
Certainly what Dr. Royster said is very true. Planning and demographics spends a tremendous amount of time preparing the yearly projections that we accomplish in time for the budget department to issue position baselines to all of our schools before the Shining Star event. But immediately after that, my staff and I began looking at numbers. Honestly, it's about twice a week from that point on, and looking at new data that we continue to get, including the fact that right now many parents whose maybe their company is moving them to California or New York or wherever are beginning to tell the school clerks that they're moving, and they're entering those numbers along with, as you know, we are about ready to begin our growth study work in planning that we do from now, and with the goal of completing early July for all the residential development in the district, so that we can adjust if we see that we need to for projections. And we continue to review all the schools' enrollments up until, the first few days of school. But there are numerous times that the projections are revised, and that's both ways, up and down, and so that we will be as close as we possibly can. And there are times, and I'll give you a couple of examples. In 17-18, and I may have mentioned this to you all one time during a facility study review or whatever, but there are times, and I remember that specifically, at Hollis and Alexander, we had 2 projects that were done by the Housing Authority where they vacated the 2 apartment complexes and completely did a renovation. But we stay in close contact with those entities, and we knew they were going to fill those apartments back up during the year. So when we have our summer meetings with the other staff members and looking at numbers, we make everybody aware of that, and we accommodated that with the allocations. So those things that we know, we deal with those and we discuss those.
Mr. Ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
May I speak
Sure, go ahead.
to Ms. Farley? Ms. Farley, you're the best at this, and all your people. I want you to know I recognize and acknowledge that you've got it going on better than anybody I could wish for. But I just want to say that there are there are schools in my area that are always growing really fast. And so it just seems to me that if we know, and I'm sure that's true in some other people's districts, but the question is, if you know that you're going to start the year full and then have kids moving in all year, in those specific cases where the trends show that, could those principals go ahead and hire in the spring for what always happens in the fall, even if the numbers are not there yet in, let's say, May? Or, if you know it's going to happen.
The projections are based on the growth that we have tracked for the last several years and what is,
Okay.
and the growth that is. And the projections, many times, I will have someone call me, a principal or whatever, and say, do you really think we're going to have this many students? And I said, yes, you are. And most times they do. Because we are making projections not based on the students they currently have, but based on all that demographic data that we gather of what we think they're really going to have. So we really work to, our goal is to have as many, have the projections as accurate as possible.
One thing that might help, Betty talked about, and I talked about too, about this process, we really start in February, and then it occurs with greater frequency throughout the spring, and it even occurs throughout the summer. I don't do this now, but as the deputy superintendent who kind of chairs that group, it's a group of people. It's not just Betty, it's Betty, and as we get further in the process, it's the assistant superintendents that oversee those schools, it's people from finance, it's people from HR, because there are implications all across the system. But a lot of times when we're looking at numbers, and those numbers begin to trend up, maybe they're a +1 or a +2, here's the question that's asked and answered by Betty and her folks. What's the likelihood that they're going to continue to grow that way? So that's always, when it starts bumping at 2, then before we add somebody, because we add them before they get to 3 during that process. Now that's the final point where we'd add, but we add throughout that process, and part of that discussion, when it gets 1 over or 2 over, is there are really 2 key questions that almost always get asked. How many sections do they have in that grade? I.e., how much room do they have for growth? Well, if you got 10 sections in a grade at a really big school, you got 10 sections, and they're only 1 over, well, you could add easily 20 more students before they'd get to 3 over. So how many sections? Some of our small schools, they have 1 or 2 sections in a grade level. And the other question is, over time, do they likely grow between now and school starting? Do they drop between now and school starting? Do they grow or drop during the year? So those are questions. This is a mathematically centered process, but not an exclusively formula-driven process. So that might help better understanding.
That's great, and that'll now go to 2 when you're bumping up.
Yes.
Those considerations will move. Thank you very much, and I just had one last question of the superintendent. Did you say in your answer a minute ago that this budget really reflects what we need for growth and inflation?
The determinant formula for millage increases that we're sent every year is based on population growth and an inflation factor that's calculated by the State Department of Revenue. For this year, that formula says to keep up with the increased cost of things, and to meet population growth in your county, you would reasonably raise the millage
5.7 mils.
5.7 mils.
Okay.
And then the difference, and then the other thing, I don't think I've made this clear enough, and Jeff may not have. And I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize this. We believe that the 6 mil, although a little bit high, certainly behind 2 previous increases, that it's a reasonable millage increase. But the only way that we were able to come in here today with a reasonable millage increase and include all those things that our community has said are important is because in the Senate version, our state revenue was greatly enhanced. And we would be remiss in particular time where there's some criticism and perhaps, that's always going to be the case, I guess, in an elected position. But this is the first time in many years that the teacher raise itself was fully funded, and the additional funds we got have put us in the position of being able to recommend to you with this reasonable millage increase to meet these other things, and that's only because the Senate version provided greater additional state revenue resources. And I think it's important that we recognize that. It's just key to this budget being as positive a budget as it is.
It's great to have that added. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Lewis.
I appreciate all of this. I have a couple of clarifying questions. One, could we go back? There was a slide that showed the breakdown of all the expenses, and it got to it was the BARC, this one. And so it shows, I think in the email is 1.2 million, it's about 1.2 million of expenses that we have saved over the past 10 years.
Things other than items other than personnel that over 10 years we've not just reduced their percentage in the budget, but actually reduced their amount.
So can we quantify some of that? Can we get some examples of what are we talking about here? What are examples of things in this area where we've reduced expenses?
Let me provide a little bit of history. During the recession, in quote, these other categories were reduced by $39.7 million. And since then, those other categories have not caught up. We have not replaced that total of $39.7 million, and that does not even consider inflation. And those $39 million cuts were occurred in FY9, FY10, and FY11. So again, we have not even replaced those items even with inflation. But some items we're talking about is we made 20% cuts in departmental budgets. We made cuts in the painting budget. Professional development were cut. We made cuts again in school supplies. That has been basically replaced. Local travel was reduced.
I think it might be better for us, because of the way Jeff described it, we cut out this huge amount. Mm-hmm. Discretionary over time, we've recommended to you all to put some of those things back because they needed to be put back.
Right.
But some things we've left out are reduced. So going through that, we culled through, and some things maintained a permanent reduction. Now, over time, as you add back to that, if you get outside of 10 years, it won't be that amount. But the primary message there is in 10 years, we're still more than $1 million less on what we spend on things other than people than we were 10 years ago. But we can send you some more specific things where they weren't put back like they were. Now, this is not included in that number, but we're basically operating the district from a district level with the same number of people at the district level that we had in 2008.
Yeah, I would appreciate the list, because I know a lot of it came from Mars and from some of the things that we're doing from an energy perspective and holding our energy cost. But
now, and really the energy, it's not a reduction in there, it's a cost avoidance. Okay. We haven't increased the energy budget, and we'll send you that. I don't want to give you the wrong number, so I'll give you sort of a ballpark. But we haven't increased the energy budget but maybe one time in 10 years, even though we've had double-digit rate increases. And we actually reduced it 4 years ago, Jeff?
It's been longer than that.
Longer than that. We'll send you that specific. That's more of a cost avoidance that where a lot of other districts and a lot of their other entities have had to increase their utility budget because they've not been able to offset double-digit rate increases. We'll send you that.
Okay. The next question is this question about the planning periods. Because I'd just like to understand, so of the current elementary schools in Greenville County, how many of them currently don't provide all of their teachers with a 30-minute planning period?
I don't think that's in those answers, Jeff, because the only way for us to do that is go and poll all 51 principals and have them tell us how many teachers don't have a planning period every day. So what we answered with, because from our perspective, it's our responsibility to provide an equitable resource. We don't provide any school with enough external resources other than Title I schools who can use their Title I to do that if they want to. And we can't consider that in how we allocate positions. There is no school to which we allocate enough people to do it for more than 3 days a week. Others are doing it because they're being innovative, they got volunteers, there's the Title I schools are able to do things because they have those extra personnel that we can't offset and reduce what we give them as a district because it gets into Title I comparability issues. So there is no school that has district resources to do that. So that's kind of our answer to that. Now, if you wish for us to go out and poll every one of those principals so we can tell you that, we'll do that, but it doesn't change our recommendation or our response because we believe it's important for us to provide them the resource so they don't have to go out and tap other things that they could use to enhance their program to do that, to provide a basic, what we've said through our strategic plan is a basic, is an item of basic importance to all of our teachers.
Well, I think it's really important that every teacher have a planning period. I don't know how we get to $2.7 million for every teacher to have a planning period if we don't know how many teachers don't have planning periods. So are we saying that $2.7 million would put the same thing at every school so that
Yes.
regardless of whether you had it before or not, this will cover it?
Yes, it provides you
Okay.
a district resource by
Okay.
which to do that through an equitable allocation, just like we
Okay.
allocate all other personnel. Yes,
So-
sir, that's a better way to look
Okay,
at
so
it.
this guarantees the same resources to every school to allow them to ensure that every elementary school teacher has a planning period.
Provided by the district.
And some schools may be using their flex money to do that already, now frees those monies up for them to do something else with it.
They might now look and see, well, now I want to get a math interventionist,
Okay,
or I want to do this. Again, has to be instructionally related.
okay. I want to go for a second through a couple of things because I have tried to crosswalk some of the advocacy positions that say SC for Ed and the Teachers Bill of Rights have taken on kind of things that they see as priorities with the results of the survey, which I really appreciate my colleague requesting be re-included in our questions because I think it's important for us to go back to what Greenville teachers have requested. It appears that most of them have been addressed in this budget. Before I go out to say that they are, I just want to make sure that this budget includes all. So one that we heard repeatedly was a reduction in class size. And we have two elements here to reduce class size. One is the first grade reduction from 19 to 18, but then also this reduction that the board action took earlier to reduce the 3 over to 2 over. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So second is a request for an unencumbered planning period. And with the addition of these $2.7 million in planning, now every teacher in Greenville County will have at minimum a 30 minutes unencumbered planning period going into next year.
We try not to use the term unencumbered. We just
Okay.
use the term planning period because
Okay.
unencumbered means different things to different
Okay.
people.
Okay.
But yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay? So then there was a recommendation that salaries be increased to the southeastern average, which we are now moving the minimum salary to $40,000, which,
We depending on teacher average salaries, like some other things, you ask that question, unless you clarify where you want the source of the answer, you'll get all these different answers. Our average right now, Stephanie, is right at the southeastern average. Slightly below, but right, just right below it. So reasonably this should move it. Now, what we never know, it's like the state average. While you all are taking this action, we don't know what boards throughout the Southeast might be doing. So
Sure.
as you understand, it's a constantly moving target. But yes, it goes to addressing that, to make us at or above. And I believe the number, the comparison you used, Stephanie, is our average actual versus average actual or midpoint salary schedule.
If you're looking at average actual, the increase that we are going to go to, the Southeast average for 19 is 51,794. And the projection for the Southeast average is 52,830. This increase will put us on average, again, it'll depend on who's where on the schedule, at 54,453.
54,453 being masters in 12?
Being
Or actual salary?
Actual salary. If you do masters in 12, it'd be 57.
This won't make sense, but if you look at our teachers, the average teacher is 12 years experience in a master's, that's one number. If we say to finance, run the average salary for all teachers in Greenville County, that number won't equal the 12 years in masters. It just won't. Although that's who the average teacher is. The average salary and the average teacher can be, within a few dollars, can be different.
But the 40,000 minimum does move our starting teacher pay above what is currently the Southeastern average, correct? Is it? I thought.
No.
I don't think we have, do we have a
Southeastern-
Southeastern starting pay average?
It doesn't include it, no.
Okay.
We'll see if we can find that. I don't know if they calculate that.
I don't.
Okay.
I've never seen it.
Okay. And then just to clarify that the actual amount of money teachers will receive an increase. If you've worked 2 years or fewer, your new starting rate will be $40,000.
Yes, sir. First 3 years. Now, remember, we didn't highlight this today, but we talked about it in the work session. That means a first-year teacher will have 4 days of professional development instead of they have 3 now. They'll have 4. A second-year teacher will have 2 additional days of professional development above all other teachers. And we believe that accomplishes 2 things. It doesn't just raise their salary. It also provides better introduction into the classroom the first year, and then the ability in year 2, before they start year 2, to do some follow-up with them, help them with things they struggled with in the first year.
Okay.
So there's the dual benefit of it. It moves your salary, but it provides some opportunity for some help for you that may make year 2 easier than year 1. It also allows, if you're a teacher in year 3 and you look behind you and there's 0 and 1 making the same thing, well, that's true. They are making the same thing, but their minimal required work year exceeds yours. So they're making the same thing for more required days of work. So we think it has those benefits as well.
And that increase to $40,000 is at minimum a 10% increase for
Yes.
those teachers.
I think at low end it's like 10.1. What's the
Yes.
range, Stephanie?
It's 10.1 to 10.7. So if you worked your 3 days this year and you're going to work the 4 days next year, that would be the lowest increase. That's 10.1.
Okay. And then for teachers 3 years to 30 years, it's a range of between 5 to 9% increases for those teachers. Is that?
Yes, because of the step in addition to the base 4%.
Okay. So every teacher is receiving a minimum 5% increase.
Even
Most are receiving-
if you're in year 44, you would get a 5% increase. That's that extras. And 7% of our teachers are off the scale. They're more than 30 years on our schedule.
I guess for me, as I look at particularly things that are happening tomorrow across the state, it seems really timely and appropriate that we are presenting a budget that addresses nearly all of the concerns raised by teachers that a local school district could do without change in policy at the state level.
I think that's an excellent summation of this, Mr. Lewis.
And I just think that's really exciting that we as a district can invest in our classrooms in this way, not only in the ways that our teachers have asked for, but in ways that the community, I think, is going to be willing to support. So I think it's very exciting.
You know, again, it goes back to the community was involved in developing the strategic plan, and the vast majority of these items over which we have control, they reflect that community input in the strategic plan.
Well, I appreciate you guys working on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Before I go to Mr. Meek, I'm going to have to excuse myself from the meeting to attend a funeral. Mrs. Levinas Wells had to step out for another engagement also. So I'm going to turn the management of the meeting over for the balance to Mrs. Morrison Fair. Thank you, Glenda.
Thank you. Derek wants me to disagree with him right off the bat, but I'll wait. Lead into it, okay.
Don't disagree.
During the workshop, Dr. Royster, I'd asked that we have a breakdown if we only did 5 meals, 4 meals, 3 meals, 2 meals, 1 meal increase. I didn't see a response to that. Maybe you're answering that today?
No, now, perhaps I didn't understand your question the same way or the statement the same way you made it. What I understood you to say in the workshop was, will you give us options if this amount exceeds the amount of the formula from the state and the use or lose millage? Now, that was what I heard in the workshop. I'm sorry if I didn't hear the other.
Okay, I'll put it in writing next time.
This stays inside those two numbers, because that was what I believed I heard you to say.
Okay. What I'd like to see is if, your recommendation is for the 6 meal, which gives us $8 million. I'd like to see what the board only decided on 5 meals, what would the administration recommend then? If the board only decided on 4 meals, what would be the recommendation of that? And I'll put it in writing so you can have it at the next meeting exactly how I want it.
Yes, sir.
My question is on the planning period for the teachers on a daily basis. Do they not have a planning at the beginning of the year? Seems like they had a syllabus or something that they turned in or whatever at the beginning of the year, how they would be teaching it each year. Am I off track?
A syllabus from the teacher as to what they would teach on
Yes.
in math at the elementary level in all the subject areas. Yes, sir, that would be correct. Mm-hmm.
What will they be planning this 30 minutes each day?
Well, although you may have a plan or an outline of what you're going to do during the entire school year, that plan requires adjustment throughout the year because students don't always move at the rate that you plan for them to move. That would be one thing as far as looking at the overall planning side of planning periods. The other thing that teachers frequently use planning periods for is to grade papers. That's a pretty common use of, we call it planning time, but that's what a lot of teachers use that time to grade papers to speed their return to students. And then it is quite honestly, some period of that is a break away from the students. At elementary being very different from middle and high school, at elementary, it is a constant supervision of the students you have. It is constant, except when they go out to art, music, or PE. So from the time they get there in the morning to the time they go home in the afternoon, they're constantly with you. Middle and high school, they change classes. You have to watch them during the class change. But it is not, the older they get, the less direct that level of supervision is. So it is for some people, for some days, for some fraction of that time, it's a break away from their normal responsibilities.
Okay. I think I'll wait and submit my question on the other so that you can have it for me next time or send it to me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Meeks. Mr. Shamley and then Mr. Southard.
Thank you. I got it in the board docs now, but I want this too. I wanted this one.
What is it, 4 or 5% raise? Oh, sorry.
Hello?
We still figure a 4 or 5% raise based, if I'm reading this right, and I'm pretty sure I've got it wrong, so just help me understand it. or 4%, whatever it winds up being, by paying them for time they have already been required to work. And when we say we're going to increase the number of days at the end of the year for training, you're saying we're going to increase that by paying them for those days? Were we not paying them for those days before, I guess is what my concern is.
I understand. I see where your confusion is, I think. The other days, the extra days, are only for first and second year teachers. We currently pay first year teachers for 3 more days of training than all other teachers. Teachers work 190 days. Student year is 180 days. 2 years ago, we recommended to the board, and the board approved 2 additional days for first-year teachers. So we can do some things with them that will help make them more successful in their classroom. And with that, they approved 2 additional days of pay. The other effect that had is made our starting wage more competitive. So when we looked at trying to get people to 40,000, because we believe there is a tremendous positive impact to being able to say to people, we pay no less than $40,000 a year.
Sure.
Well, that meant that 0 years experience, so first-year teachers and second-year teachers, would be making the same thing as third-year teachers. Well, for this coming year, for that third-year teacher, that's a big increase over what they made last year. But now when they look behind them, they say, well, gosh, I'm making the same thing a first-year teacher makes. I'm making the same thing a second-year teacher makes. Well, you're not, because we're now going to add 2 days to the second-year teacher. So between their first year and second year, they'll have 2 days of in-service. And you'll see descriptions in there as to the things we will do with them.
Yeah.
And we're going to go from 3 days with first-year teachers to 4. So that a teacher won't look back, if you're a third-year teacher, and say, well, I'm making the same thing they're making. Well, technically the total amount is the same, but they're working more days for it. It's only true for 0, 1, and 2, not true for all the other teachers. All the rest of them, their pay raise is based on, here, you're going to get more money for doing essentially the same job, you're going to get more money. That's why the year 0, 1, and 2, if you look at those cells, that's a 10% raise as opposed to 5 to 9%.
Okay. So, but you're going to pay them for, and I still have trouble here, the first and second and third year, or the first and second year teacher is going to make $40,000 in money every year by working 2 extra days.
First year, 4 days.
Yeah.
Second year, 2 days.
Okay.
Otherwise, they would simply have gotten a 5% raise or 4% raise.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shamley. Mr. Southard?
Mr. Knox, how many mills have we increased the last 3 years?
For FY19, we did 5.1 mills. For FY18, we did 2.3 mills. In FY17, the millage increase was 0. So you're looking at 7.4 mills.
Okay. We do a 6 mil increase, that's $8 million. And if I look at what we've got here, we're saying that we're going to take 2.7 million of that for our 30-minute teacher planning. We're going to take 100,000 for the career center instructional. What we're going to do with the other $5 million, Dr. Royster?
I didn't hear the question.
Well, we don't specify an amount that equals, I mean, we don't identify an expense and say this is what we're using the additional millage for. We identify our priorities and say they cost this much and this is how much it's going to require above what we're going to receive anyway. I think the answer to your question will come in the answer to Mr. Meek's question. In other words, here's what we wouldn't put in there if you don't go 6 mills.
So we're going to go all the way from 6 meals down to 1 meal.
You have the administration's recommended budget, and that will remain the same. We will answer Mr. Meek's question as to what would we recommend be removed from that a meal at a time. That will answer your question, but we don't build the budget necessarily the way that you're asking that question.
Is any of that tied in with things that the state says we have got to increase?
No, sir. This is the first time in a number of years that the state has actually sent a sufficient amount of money to raise all the teacher pay the amount they specify. Now, they don't ever send enough to do anything really else, but they have covered that, and with a little bit beyond that.
Okay, we're basing our millage on Act 388.
Yes, sir. 5.7 of the 6 mills is based on Act 388. It's what it says you need to do to keep up with inflation and growth.
The 5.7 is to keep up with inflation and growth. Is that what
Yes, sir. That's what the formula says you need to do to keep up with inflation. And then you have 1.1 mills that are use or lose, and you're holding right now, in addition to the new 5.7, 10-something, Jeff?
10.1 mils.
So you've got over 15 mills that you're holding in reserve as of the latest notification.
Okay, when we're taking this Act 388, we're taxing automobiles. What else are we taxing?
Act 388 taxes business property for operating purposes. It taxes your car, boat, truck, motorhome, motorcycle, airplane. They'll leave any out, Jeff?
Utilities,
Well, not your utilities.
Right. Utility,
well, that's a business. Business or utility, any kind of business. And you have in there, we run every year some examples of the impact to small businesses. You have that in your budget packet. And also the impact, we take the 3 most popular vehicles to own, which is a Honda, a Toyota, and a Ford F-150 truck, and we give you the amount that it would cause their taxes to go up on a new one. And also, we know on average in the United States, people drive 11-year-old cars, so there's an 11-year-old calculation in there as well.
So this 6 mil increase will be taken off from the business property, the cars, and the business utilities.
Yes, sir.
That's who we're going to ask to give us the additional tax.
Yes, sir. Everybody that has a business in or resides in the district would pay some amount, but it's minimal on people who live in their own, it's minimal on individuals because it only applies basically to their means of transportation, unless they're a business owner.
Because you're paying more
Okay.
a year if you multiply it by
Well,
12.
I think what has been asked for, if we're going to give it to us in a meal, per meal value, I think that would really be of a great help.
Yes, sir.
So if we can get that, not the day before we do our second reading, but if we can do that a few days before that.
Yes, sir. The reason we gave the deadline of, say again?
May 5th.
Is the second and the final reading of the budget is scheduled for?
May 21st.
May the 21st. So you should have that information, because depending on how many questions you ask, quite honestly, it took a good bit of time to answer the work session questions. So, the more questions you ask, the more amount of time it may take us to answer them. But that should ensure that you get that back at least a week before the public hearing and the second reading.
Yes, I read all those questions that were asked, and I was wondering what they were being asked for sometimes, because it does get rather intensive. That's all I have. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Thank you, Mrs. Southern. Mrs. Goodwin Caldwell.
One more question, Jeff. I was asked by another elected official from the city of Greenville about a penny tax that they had to sue, for, and that we should be requesting. Do you know what exactly they were talking about?
It may be talking about a local option penny sales tax.
And they say we've never gotten the revenue from that.
There are some legal aspects we would have to look at. I'd have to ask Mr. Webb to look at them for us to see whether it's viable or not.
I think what you're referencing is the local penny option, which can apply to debt service. There is not an optional sales tax for school districts for operating purposes.
That's correct.
So there is the option to do one for debt service. Our concern in years past with that, and it would continue to be a concern, because we have the outstanding best debt, and there is an expiration on the sales tax. In other words, it's for a defined period of time. They just did one in Anderson County for the 5 districts there. Is it a 5-year window, Jeff?
I'm pretty sure it's a 5-year window.
Because we've got those outstanding bonds, it's probably not a valid option for Greenville until 2028.
Okay.
Because I think you would cause some concern amongst those bondholders if you went to a method that's got to go back before the voters in 5 years to ensure there's sufficient funding there to meet those obligations. Now, I'm not aware of any ability to utilize a sales tax for school operating purposes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Dr. O'Connor.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I meant to thank the superintendent and staff for answering all those questions. I don't think I'll try to explain why I asked mine, but I want to say that I appreciate the colleagues who had questions and got very thorough answers to them, because it helps me understand how to advocate for the needs of my community, to be able to reveal precise numbers when I'm asked about what's most important regarding our community priorities. So I really recognize there was a lot of time and effort that went into that. The only thing I wanted to say about the answers regarding class size, I'm very appreciative of the recommendation as it stands right now. And only if we started going in the other direction would I then want to ask for the specific places where we are way over on our class sizes, because the average doesn't really reveal the pain that many classrooms experience with their actual numbers, because when we put in averages with Title I, which have great class size reductions with all, it doesn't really show where those at the seams and beyond classes are. But thankfully, that's been corrected in the recommendation you've been able to bring back. So, but I know that the people in my community were very interested in class size and reading and in all the areas here. So I look forward to studying all of this ongoing, and thank the staff for digging into it. Thank you.
Do I have any other speakers?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Meek, and then Mr. Shamley.
Thank you. Jeff, if we don't use the millage, 1.8 we lose, right?
1.1.
1.1. What is it we lose next year and the year after that? It's a 3-year, isn't it?
Yes, sir. It's 3 years.
You would have the chance of losing 3.9 mils.
Next year?
Yes, sir.
And what's a year after that?
It would be 5.1 mils.
Okay. Okay. And,
Let me make sure, because for FY, it'd be 3.9 mils, and then there'll be additional 5.1 mils you would lose.
okay, depending on what, how many millage we were to increase it this year,
Yes, sir.
it would depend on whether we lose to 5.
I'm sorry, say it again,
It would
please.
it would depend on the millage that we use this year on the recommendation from the state.
Yes, sir.
Whether the third year would be 5 mills or not.
It will also affect how many mills you will potentially lose for FY '21 also.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Shamley?
Just a question about the increase in taxes on vehicles. When you look at the annual and the monthly, I haven't been able to make any of them add up. Is that just one of my typical math problems? For example, monthly tax on F-150 2019 is 97 cents, but annually it's $1.65. And for a 2008 F-150, the tax is $2.48. I can't make any sense out of that. Is that just, I mean, correct me if I'm just not doing good math, I don't know.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go back and look at it. There's other items involved in that. It's just not our tax increase. This reflects just ours, but other items involved. I'll go back and check a number again and
Okay.
look at it.
Thank you. That was all I had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions or speakers? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, we are officially adjourned.
We didn't vote?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can I have a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No. Okay, there are no opposes, so the meeting is officially adjourned.